August 1939. As Europe watched uneasily, two signatures in Moscow quietly erased Poland's future. Promised rescue from the West never came. Instead, when German tanks rolled in and Soviet forces closed from behind, Poland was left impossibly outnumbered, with over 2,000 enemy tanks versus a fraction in defense. How did a nation fight on when betrayal sealed its fate? The answer upends everything you think you know about Poland's final stand. On August 23, 1939, two foreign ministers, Joachim von Ribbentrop for Germany and Vyacheslav Molotov for the Soviet Union, sat across a table in Moscow and signed a document that would redraw the map of Eastern Europe. The world saw only a non-aggression pact, but a secret protocol hidden in the treaty's final pages divided Poland in advance between Hitler and Stalin. The boundary lines traced along the Narev, Vistula, and San rivers split the country into German and Soviet spheres of influence. This agreement allowed Germany to plan its assault on Poland without fear of Soviet intervention from the east. For Polish leaders, the pact's existence was suspected, but its contents were unknown until German and Soviet armies stacked it in near-perfect sequence. The ink on the agreement was barely dry when 8 days later, German forces crossed the western border. With the Soviet Union now committed to stand aside, and soon to invade from the east, Poland's fate had been sealed by a single night's negotiation in Moscow. The diplomatic world had shifted in silence, and the Polish state was left surrounded, its security erased by signatures no one in Warsaw had witnessed. On March 31, 1939, Britain and France announced their guarantee to defend Poland's independence. The pledge arrived in Warsaw as reassurance, backed by diplomatic cables and public statements. Yet when German tanks crossed the border on September 1, 1939, the promised support never materialized. British and French leaders delivered ultimatums to Berlin, then declared war on Germany by September 3, 1939. But these declarations brought no relief. In Paris, French commanders authorized only a limited advance into the Saar region. 5 divisions moved a few miles into empty German territory, then halted. British forces remained in England, preparing for a conflict expected to last months, not weeks. Cabinet minutes and telegrams reveal hesitation, with both governments citing incomplete mobilization and the need to avoid risking their own borders. Polish generals waited each day for news of a Western offensive that would force Germany to divert troops. None came. As Warsaw burned and the front lines collapsed, Allied promises became distant echoes. For Poland, the guarantees of spring turned into isolation by autumn, leaving the country to face its enemies alone. Marshal Edward Rydz-Smigli faced a calculation that no commander could envy. On paper, Poland's armed forces numbered nearly 1 million, but only a fraction stood ready when the first German columns crossed the border. The reason lay in a web of diplomatic pressure and hard arithmetic. In late August, as rumors of war thickened, Rydz-Smigli ordered full mobilization. Within a day, the order was halted under urging from Britain and France, both anxious not to provoke Hitler, both promising that time would buy Polish security. The result was a patchwork army, some units at the front, others still gathering in towns, or waiting for trains that would never arrive. The numbers told their own story. Germany deployed over 2,000 tanks against Poland's 600, many of which were no match for panzer armor. In the air, the gap was even wider. The Luftwaffe sent more than 1,300 aircraft, while the Polish Air Force could muster just 400, most already outclassed. German divisions, 62 in total, moved with speed and coordination, supported by radios, motorized columns, and close air support. Polish forces, by contrast, relied on horses for mobility and telephones for communication, both vulnerable to bombing and sabotage. The hope for relief from the West faded with each telegram. French and British leaders, citing incomplete mobilization and the risk to their own borders, advised restraint. Rydz-Smigli, trusting in Allied promises of a 2-week offensive, kept his armies forward, spread thin along a 1,600-kilometer frontier. When the invasion came, many units were still forming up. Reserve battalions scrambled to join the fight, often arriving piecemeal and without heavy weapons. The country faced not only a stronger enemy, but also the consequences of decisions made under the shadow of alliance politics. Every day's delay in mobilization cost Poland the chance to meet the German attack with its full strength. For commanders in Warsaw, defeat was not a question of courage, but of mathematics. At dawn on September 1st, 1939, the 19th Volhynian Uhlan Regiment, Polish cavalry, waited in the forests near Mokra. German armor, led by the 4th Panzer Division, pushed forward, expecting an easy breakthrough. Instead, the Germans met a defense built not on outdated charges, but on modern tactics and careful preparation. The Polish cavalry, mounted for speed but trained to fight on foot, dismounted and dug in along the wooded ridges and railway embankments. Beaufort's anti-tank guns and Erdogan DC-5 rifles, hidden until the last moment, opened fire as the first German tanks appeared through the morning mist. The battle stretched through the day. Panzer columns tried to flank the defenders, but the Poles used the dense terrain to ambush tanks and infantry. At one point, Polish cavalrymen counterattacked on horseback, not against tanks, but to push back German infantry and recover lost ground. Artillery support from the rear lines shattered several armored vehicles, while machine gunners picked off advancing troops. By nightfall, the 4th Panzer Division had lost over 20 tanks and dozens of vehicles. German reports counted more than 160 killed and 200 wounded in their ranks. Polish losses were heavy, about 170 dead, but the line held. The myth of Polish lancers charging tanks grew out of Nazi propaganda after Mokra. In reality, cavalry units like the 19th Volhynian Uhlans fought as mobile infantry, using horses for maneuver, but relying on firepower and discipline in defense. Their tactics at Mokra delayed the German 10th Army, buying precious time for other Polish units to regroup. For one day, a single cavalry brigade proved that courage, training, and adaptation could blunt even the most modern mechanized assault. The story of Mokra stands as a reminder. Poland's cavalry did not ride blindly into the past, but met the future head-on, sometimes with surprising success. On September 9th, as German forces pressed toward Warsaw, General Tadeusz Kuczeba launched a counter-offensive along the Bzura River. The plan was bold: strike at the exposed flank of the German 8th Army, disrupt their advance, and relieve pressure on the capital. Nearly 200,000 Polish troops, primarily from the Poznan and Pomorze armies, crossed the Bzura in coordinated attacks, catching the Germans off guard. For several days, Polish infantry and cavalry pushed the enemy back, retaking villages and forcing German units to regroup. Kuczeba's staff pored over maps, searching for weaknesses, racing against time before German reserves could respond. The initial success stunned German commanders, who rushed panzer divisions and Stuka dive bombers to seal the breach. The counter-offensive quickly became a battle of encirclement. German air superiority turned the riverbanks into killing fields, with columns of Polish soldiers and civilians trapped in open ground. By September 16th, the Bzura pocket began to collapse as German armor closed in from the north and south. Kuczeba ordered desperate breakouts toward Warsaw, but the bridges were already under fire. The fighting lasted 10 days. By September 19th, the last organized resistance along the Bzura ended. Over 170,000 Polish troops were taken prisoner, one of the largest single surrenders of the campaign. Kuczeba himself managed to reach Warsaw with a handful of survivors, but the cost was immense. The Bzura counter-offensive remains the largest Polish battle of the war, a gamble born of necessity, driven by hope and extinguished by overwhelming force. In those days, the Polish command gambled everything to save their capital, knowing that every hour gained was bought with lives. The collapse at Bzura left the road to Warsaw open, with German and soon Soviet armies closing in from all sides. At dawn on September 17, 1939, Polish radio operators intercepted unfamiliar signals from the east. Within hours, Red Army columns crossed the border along a 1,000-kilometer front, advancing towards cities like Wilno, Grodno, and Lwów. Soviet commanders carried orders from Kliment Voroshilov, framing the invasion as a mission to protect Ukrainians and Belarusians. For the Polish High Command, the meaning was unmistakable. The eastern frontier had collapsed without warning or declaration of war. The Polish General Staff gathered in Warsaw, poring over intercepted messages and reports from border outposts. Some units, like the Kresova Cavalry Brigade, attempted brief resistance, but most received instructions to avoid direct conflict with the Soviets. Marshal Rids Smigly issued a terse directive telling commanders not to engage the Bolsheviks unless attacked. The shock inside headquarters was total. Until that morning, Polish commanders had clung to the hope of regrouping in the southeast, forming a new defensive line, or retreating toward the Romanian bridgehead. The Red Army's arrival shattered those plans in a single stroke. Orders for evacuation went out by midday. Government officials, senior officers, and diplomatic staff began a hurried flight south, aiming for the Romanian border. In the east, Polish formations found themselves caught between two enemies, their escape routes closing with every passing hour. By nightfall, the reality was clear. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact had come to life not only on paper, but in columns of Soviet tanks and infantry stretching across the horizon. Warsaw's high command understood that the war was no longer a contest between armies, but a fight for survival. The maneuver phase ended as quickly as it had begun, with German and Soviet forces now advancing from both sides. The fate of the Polish state hung by a thread. From September 8th, Warsaw became a city under siege. German divisions encircled the capital, cutting off supplies and escape routes. The first days brought a steady drum of artillery, but by September 24th, the Luftwaffe unleashed a wave of destruction. 1,150 bombers filled the sky in a single day. Streets vanished beneath rubble. Water mains burst. Fires spread unchecked, and the city's heartbeat slowed to the rhythm of falling bombs. Among the chaos, daily life continued in fragments. Stefan, a tram driver, steered his battered car through ruined avenues, sometimes carrying the wounded to makeshift hospitals, sometimes ferrying families searching for shelter. Each journey meant navigating shattered glass, unexploded shells, and the constant fear of a new raid. In his diary, he wrote of nights spent in darkness, the only light coming from burning buildings and the flash of explosions. Zofia, a teenage courier with the Polish scouts, ran messages across the city. She moved through cellars and tunnels, dodging debris and collapsing walls. Her world shrank to the distance between safe houses, the weight of a satchel and the sound of distant sirens. In a letter to her mother, she described the terror of waiting, listening for the whistle of bombs, then the silence that meant it was safe to move again. Inside a crowded hospital, Dr. Marek Lewin worked by candlelight. Supplies ran out quickly. No anesthesia, little water, bandages torn from bedsheets. Each day brought new casualties, children, soldiers, neighbors, carried in on doors or stretchers. He recorded the names of the dead in a ledger that grew heavier with each passing hour. By the end of September, nearly 40,000 civilians had died. On September 27th, with food and ammunition gone, Warsaw's defenders surrendered. The city lay in ruins, 10% destroyed, countless lives uprooted. But in battered notebooks and fading letters, the voices of those who endured left a record of courage and loss that could not be erased. On the night of September 17th, 1939, as Polish defenses crumbled and the government fled south, a submarine crew in Tallinn, Estonia, refused to surrender. The Polish submarine Warsaw had been battered and stripped of charts and weapons by Estonian authorities and lay trapped in the harbour. Under cover of darkness, Lieutenant Commander Jan Grudzinski and his men cut the mooring lines, overpowered their guards, and disabled the harbour lights. As Estonian searchlights swept the water and machine guns opened fire, Orzel ran aground on a sandbar for a tense moment, then broke free into the Baltic Sea. Navigation was a matter of memory and starlight. Every map and compass had been confiscated, yet the crew pressed on, evading enemy patrols and minefields, determined to rejoin the fight. Days later, they set 2 Estonian guards ashore on Gotland and vanished into the North Sea. By early October, Orzel had reached Britain, battered but unbroken, joining other exiled Polish ships to form the nucleus of a navy that would serve throughout the war. The escape became legend. 60 men cut off from home, refusing captivity, carrying their flag across hostile waters. On land, the collapse of organized resistance did not bring silence. Thousands of soldiers, pilots, and officers slipped across borders into Romania and Hungary, seeking any path west. The journey was perilous. Border guards, German patrols, and Soviet units blocked the way. But by the spring of 1940, more than 8,000 Polish airmen had reached France and Britain. Many would soon fly with the RAF, forming squadrons that would help defend the skies over England. Others joined new armies in exile, determined to continue the struggle from foreign soil. In Paris, a new Polish government took shape in late September 1939, led by General Władysław Sikorski. From cramped offices and borrowed radios, orders travelled back to the occupied homeland, laying the first threads of an underground network. Secret couriers, forged documents, and whispered messages began to crisscross occupied Poland, planting the seeds of a resistance that would grow in the shadows. Defeat on the battlefield did not end the war for Poland. In exile, at sea, and beneath the occupied streets, the fight continued, dispersed but unbroken. The story of September 1939 closed with occupation, but the resolve to resist had only just begun. Today, Poland's fate in 1939 stands as a warning. Alliances and promises can vanish overnight, leaving nations exposed to overwhelming force. As Europe again faces shifting borders and uncertain guarantees, the lesson endures. Security isn't just about treaties, but vigilance and resilience. The cost of neglecting this remains written across Warsaw's shattered streets. What would we risk if history repeats? Share your thoughts below.